have registered today that were unable to attend the session. So we'll certainly make the recording available to you all. So thank you for joining me today and spending hopefully what will be a useful hour for you and a good investment of your time. And we're talking about cracking the code, understanding the role of behaviour in the boardroom. We've got a lot to get through today, and lots of valuable information that you'll get from today's time spent with us at the Governance Boutique. And I'm sure you'll have some burning questions. Just in the interest of time, I'll go through the presentation, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity at the end to have a Q&A session. In the meantime, if you do have any burning questions, please put them into the chat, and my colleagues will be looking at those and we'll hopefully have an opportunity to answer those questions at the end. Now, some of you will be board directors, some of you will be governance professionals that support the board. Some of you perhaps will aspire to serve on the board. Whichever lens that you're looking at, there's a lot for you to ponder here. If you're a serving director, you may ask yourself, am I exhibiting the behaviours that enable me to fulfil my fiduciary duty and optimise my effect as a director? If you're looking at it through the lens of a governance professional, you may wish to consider how you can encourage those behaviours on your board. Okay, so first of all, let's have a look at what we're going to be covering today. So I thought it'd be helpful to look at the historical context, really, just how we've arrived at the sort of modern functioning of boards, and also board failures as well, where behaviour plays a huge part in that. This is a particular interest of mine. I love corporate governance scandals. It must be a twisted mind I have, but I find them very, very interesting. And looking at what could have happened. We'll be looking at what behaviours should modern boards be looking for, and so we'll run through some of those sort of key behaviours and those competencies. We'll look at a skills matrix as well, and just as a sample, and what does that look like? What should you be putting onto the skills matrix when you're looking for recruiting a new director? We also consider behavioural competencies and the behavioural interview process, which we'll introduce today. And finally, I also have the privilege of having what we call a fireside chat with Christy, and we'll introduce Christy later. And I'm so happy that Christy has been able to join us today. So, like I say, it's helpful to look at the historical context to understand why behaviours are so important. So, of course, some of this will be quite familiar to you as governance professionals, but the first boards, of course, were mainly founder member companies, those that were created before the Industrial Revolution, using capital from closely held sources such as merchants funding a sea voyage. Now, of course, here, shareholders were usually the directors and therefore ran the company with a vested interest in preserving their money and hopefully increasing it. This meant that, of course, the board could never be truly independent. Now, of course, with the Industrial Revolution, that brought about a sort of need for large-scale capital investment, which led to the formation of companies with really a dispersed ownership. And this meant that there was often weak oversight and control. Although the money, of course, was from widely dispersed sources, the management had the control of the funds and often used it for their own purposes. And there we go. A few people coming in, by the way, as we go along. So I'll just admit those as we do. This resulted, of course, in a number of corporate governance scandals and financial crises. And of course, that promptly calls for regulatory reforms and improved governance around, how these organisations were run, particularly, during the Depression, for example, in end of the 20s, early 30s. Now, after World War II, of course, companies expanded even more, and that meant that ownership was even more widely dispersed in large public companies. And this sort of refined that agency principle, where essentially board directors were tasked with representing the interests of shareholders by providing oversight of management's operations. But of course, at that time, shareholder primacy was uppermost in the board's minds. And that type of thinking pretty much persisted, I think, until the beginning of the 21st century, when, of course, we had further corporate governance scandals, which I'll touch on briefly. And of course, these prompted the need for further governance reforms. And of course, there's been a number of governance codes globally in the last 30 years, which has somewhat focused, I think, on the diversity and the independence of the boards, and also examined its role within the sort of wider context, particularly now in regard to when we think about stakeholder engagement. The board is now tasked with looking at a wider range of stakeholders rather than just shareholders. And of course, ESG factors have really brought this in, the environmental and social governance. And of course, a lot of this change was led by the sort of shareholder activism, and of course, these factors that we're dealing with now, these macro factors such as climate change, broader shifts in society and attitudes. And most recently is the ISO, the International Standards Organization 37,000, which is essentially the universal benchmark for good governance for all types of organizations. However, even now I find that, working with directors, they sometimes lack an appreciation of their role as an oversight body. And they can often fall foul of getting too immersed into the day-to-day running of the business, which of course should be left to the managers. And so knowing where that demarcation line lies requires an assessment of the constitution of the organization, because of course each one will be different. But it's important that you understand the constitution, understand the governance framework, because that should make that line very, very clear to both board and management. Okay. So again, like I say, something of keen interest to me, just because I think it really gives us an insight into behaviours. I'm a strong believer that corporate failures usually happen not because of a deficiency necessarily in the systems of corporate governance, although a weak governance framework can be a contributory factor. But it's usually, I think, because of the behaviour or the conduct of the organisation's leaders. And I put forward here a few examples. Firstly, in 1990, the Mirror Group newspapers, Robert Maxwell in the UK. So Robert Maxwell, for those of you that may not have heard of him, stole 400 million from his pension fund, or not his, but the group's pension fund, to prop up his ailing group of companies. Now, Robert Maxwell was a bullying, dominant director that the board essentially were afraid of. They didn't dare cross him. They failed to challenge him or rein him in by asking the right questions. And as a result, thousands of people lost their livelihood, they lost their pensions. And this and other related scandals led to one of the world's first governance codes, the Financial Aspects of Corporate Governance, or otherwise known as the Cadbury Report in 1992 in the UK, which really examined the role of the board in overseeing the executive team. Now, fast forward to 2000, Enron. We all know about Enron, a Machiavellian culture, getting ahead at any cost, highly competitive, the winner takes all culture. And that led, of course, the leadership to cut corners, sacrifice ethical principles in the pursuit of greed and higher profits. Now, Andrew Fastow, the CFO, when he was presenting his plan to hide the balance sheet debt in offshore companies, he said that the only question that the board asked was, is it legal? Okay. It took the brave action of a whistleblower, Sharon Watkins, to expose the extent of the fraud. Fraud that, of course, caused thousands of people again to lose their livelihoods, their pensions, and some of course, to lose their lives as well. There's a number of suicides as a result of what happened. It's probably still the most famous example, I think, of corporate greed and scandal. And it led to the proscriptive Sarbanes-Oxley Act in 2002 in the US. 2010, BP, Deepwater Horizon. The explosion and sinking of the oil drilling rig in the Gulf of Mexico was really the largest spill in the history of drilling operations, oil drilling. Now, the environmental effects of this were catastrophic, but completely preventable. There was a culture of cost cutting, which meant that Vital safety procedures were ignored and proper structural testing was overlooked. The board went missing in action. They oversaw high-risk activities, but they failed to ask the right questions. They failed to assess risk adequately. And of course, when the crisis occurred, everyone ran for cover, blaming each other. Cover-ups, lies, deceit. Whilst BP CEO Tony Hayward was blasted for his public fumbles in dealing with the oil spill, the BP board, especially chairman Karl-Henrik Svanberg at that time, drew massive negative attention for their cluelessness. 2018, Theranos, quite recent, been in the news very, very recently, led by Elizabeth Holmes, was a medical technology company based in Silicon Valley, which claimed to have developed a revolutionary blood testing technology that required one small pinprick of blood that could be used as to test really for a battery of health conditions, including cancer and diabetes. So, of course, this was revolutionary technology that attracted billions in funding, including backers such as Rupert Murdoch and America's richest family, the Waltons. But eventually it was found to be based on suspect science. Now, the company's toxic, secretive culture and habit of exploiting regulatory loopholes really led to a complete lack of policing until it eventually came out. And Forbes reported that the maker of Theranos' Boardroom has done very little for the credibility in the medical technology industry. They reported that Theranos at one point had a star-studded board of directors, including military leaders and former secretaries of state, including the late Dr. Henry Kissinger. The board appears to have been assembled primarily to secure influential governmental connections rather than to govern with solid industry insight, product knowledge, and operational expertise. They also reported, and again, quote here, there are 6 directors with no medical or technology experience, with an average age, get this, of 80. One wonders just how plugged in they were to Theranos' day-to-day activities, nor is there anyone with formal accounting or auditing or legal expertise. Now, I use these examples as high profile but cautionary tales of why we need boards that engage in that sort of healthy skepticism balanced with asking the right questions, because there's hundreds of other examples that I could have given, and there'll be many more scandals that come in the future. It seems that we seem doomed to repeat the same mistakes time and time again, but I think you get the picture. Behaviour, conduct and mindset are at the very heart of the functions of the board. Okay, so what behaviours should modern boards be looking for? So before I look at some of those key behaviours that we should be looking for on boards, I want to just qualify this by saying that this webinar is focused on behaviours and what we might call soft skills. So you should remember that this is only one part of the whole jigsaw in the recruitment process. You still need to remember to look for such areas as technical competence, understanding, governance and industry knowledge, independence, diversity, ability to put in the time commitment to be effective. Constitutional requirements such as shareholder agreements may require the appointment of shareholder representatives on the board, okay, those sort of stakeholder boards. And in this webinar, as I say, we are focused purely on mindset and behaviour. That's key to what we talk about today. So let's have a look at the board ecosystem. So in 2016, the UK Financial Reporting Council, the FRC, published a report called Corporate Culture and the Role of Boards. And the FRC defined culture in a corporate context as a combination of the values, attitudes, and behaviours manifested by a company in its operation and relations with its stakeholders. So these stakeholders include shareholders, employees, customers, suppliers, and the wider community and the environments which are affected by a company's conduct, because a company does not work in isolation. We have to work within that ecosystem. And this is why behaviours and culture is so critical. So the FRC highlighted the importance of culture in the business in terms of creating trust, transparency, and a speak up culture, which therefore should cascade and be integrated throughout the organisation. Because the FRC sees culture as an asset and a potential source of competitive advantage, particularly because we live in a world where levels of accountability and transparency are increasingly significant and scrutinized. Like I say, culture should be integrated and embedded throughout the organization through the systems that we have: recruitment, onboarding training, leadership development, and succession planning. And those are just at the board and the governing body level. It advocates that organizations can build trust with stakeholders through a governance framework that supports ethical behaviors, empowered and well-resourced compliance and risk management functions, and supported by key performance indicators for measuring progress in developing and sustaining a healthy culture, and incentivized, of course, through appropriate compensation practices. Okay, so these KPIs can be used to report internally and externally as the basis of an ongoing dialogue with stakeholders. Okay, so when I sort of look through the report, I think the key message for me was that culture and values that drive the culture, how we behave and how we operate as an organization, that must start with the board, okay, and executive management, who set the tone and act as role models for ethical conduct. If they do this, I truly believe that culture can be that source of competitive advantage. It may not be on our balance sheet, but it really is a source of advantage, because if you have a culture like Enron or Theranos, you may be successful for a brief time, but it's hardly sustainable. Okay, so as a board member, you need to understand this ecosystem. You need to be familiar with it as it relates to your organization. And you need to be prepared to raise questions on it to make sure that that ecosystem, the values and the behaviors and the mindset is driven right through the organization. Okay, it's not just exhibited at board and executive management level, although they will be the setting the tone, they will be the role models for conduct, which then should be integrated right throughout the organization. Okay. So if we think about that, let's just then pause there and say, well, if we're trying to develop that culture that can be that source of competitive advantage, what then should we be looking for in terms of some behaviors and mindset from our board members? So over the next few slides, I'll be looking at some important behavioral competencies. And these are sort of based on our readings, our experience, and our conversations that we've had at the Governance Boutique. Conversations as executive coaches with boards and business leaders. Now, I'm sure, as I go through this list, I'm sure that you'll be able to think of more as well. What I have done is I've grouped some of these competencies into categories. So what we'll do is we'll look at these from a high level, as each attribute, of course, could be a separate conversation in itself, and we just don't have enough time in this webinar to take a deeper dive. But what you will see as I go through that is that some of these are closely related and interchangeable. So firstly, looking at personality, self-awareness, I think this is so important that you know yourself, know thyself, know your strengths and weaknesses, know how you come across to others and how others perceive you, recognizing, for example, situations when you may be getting stressed or angry. It's about having a clear sense of your own direction as well. That self-awareness is so critical. This then really leads, I think, into self-regard and confidence as well, because one of the most important aspects, I believe, of who you are and how you consider yourself is really just having a strong sense of self-regard, having a positive inner dialogue, having an optimistic outlook, recognizing that we all face challenges in life. and how we deal with them, how we respond to them, hopefully with confidence and with an achievement orientation, is so important that what we tell ourselves means that our challenges, we're not fazed by them. Okay, we accept that challenges are part of our self-development. Okay, and we embrace them. Also, I think when we have a good sense of self-regard and confidence, that we're comfortable receiving negative feedback, recognizing that it's part of our personal growth, as long, of course, as it's delivered in the right way. I'm sure some of you can think of lots of bosses you may have had in the past that gave you negative feedback that was really designed to tear you down and not build you up. Okay, but you need to be open to receiving that feedback. Okay, it's important to your own development. Curiosity, being open-minded, I think this is about a willingness to listen, to sometimes suspend judgment as well, and our own personal biases, because we do have them, whatever our background, you know, and experiences, we will have these unconscious biases. We sometimes need to recognize that they are present. And when we're open-minded, we have a genuine desire to understand and give respect to the other person and their sort of viewpoint as well, and therefore to engage in sort of critical thinking, to evaluate information and arguments objectively. When we're open-minded, we're much more objective, and we're much more adaptable as well, because we can respond positively to change and to things that that are unfamiliar to us. We're not thrown off by unexpected events. And sometimes as well, when we're adaptable, it means that we need to learn from failure as well, and to be prepared to take calculated risks. And as a leader, I think that when you're adaptable as well, you can help to sweep others along with your own enthusiasm to change and embrace maybe innovative approaches. One of the things I always say to new directors when I'm onboarding them is to leave your ego at the door, having a sense of humility, being prepared to be a learning, you know, to learn. And collectively, the board should be a learning board. Okay, there should be. You should have personally a willingness to recognize that you're not the finished article, that you're willing to be coached and supported by others. And I think very important is a commitment to lifelong learning and personal development. One of the things I've also found very important as a stress release as well is having a humble approach and a sense of humor as well when we do fail. Okay, you know, because we will fail, we'll always fail. Assertiveness, okay, ability to advocate for your position whilst respecting those boundaries. Being able to articulate your arguments in a balanced and well-prepared way, making sure that your delivery is clear, but not overly aggressive, that you're respecting other viewpoints. And I think integrity, having a strong moral compass, consider stakeholder interest and look at the bigger picture before deciding, because that is what we are tasked to do now on boards. We have to look at the wider stakeholder interests. Okay, and that means that you're objective, you're authentic, you're not driven by personal or political interests. Okay, someone with integrity will do the right thing even when no one is watching. Okay, so next one, interpersonal skills. And again, I've categorized these as as I say, that often they're sort of interchangeable, and they all speak to a wider quality of an individual. I think it's so important to be an active listener, somebody that can listen to the other viewpoint and seeks to understand and considers their viewpoints, even when they're different to their own. And being a negotiator doesn't necessarily then mean that it's all about you winning and the other person losing. It's about adopting what Stephen Covey called a win-win mindset. In other words, that we're solutions focused, but equally not willing to compromise on issues, but standing your ground. And that, again, flows into assertiveness. But at the same time, recognizing that both parties need to walk away reasonably satisfied from the outcome, particularly if you have an ongoing relationship with the other party. Being a mediator as well, I've had to, as a corporate secretary, be a mediator many, many times in my career. And that means having good conflict resolution skills, being a consensus builder, really important as a chair that you're able to build consensus and get agreement, able to navigate sometimes complex opposing viewpoints, bring them to the surface and address them as well. So in other words, making sure that things are not under the table, that you address them in a transparent and authentic way. I think as a director, you need to have a degree of courage. And as a corporate secretary, and I'll qualify that as well, sometimes you need to be able to speak up when something is off. Now, sometimes, particularly I've seen it with new directors, they're a bit nervous on the board, they're very, you know, not familiar with the whole process, maybe don't know the other board members too well. And they're afraid to stand up because they're afraid of derision or hostility from other board members. But, you know, as a board member, you need to be resilient enough to follow through on your convictions, even in the face of pressure. Okay, and I go back to those corporate governance scandals, Enron, okay, Theranos, Maxwell. The board did not have the courage to speak up when they perhaps should have done. I think cultural intelligence as well. As boards become more and more diverse, we need to have that ability to understand and respect different cultures in the workplace and how they can be leveraged to support sort of different ways of doing things. So where I think of this as well, as a director, you're representing your organization, okay? You need to understand the cultural and diversity of your organization. Just having that awareness, that cultural radar, very, very important. Okay, so the next category, leadership, I think again here, being a good influencer, being a good communicator, leveraging your relationships to achieve success through other people, okay? Being articulate and a persuasive communicator, somebody that engages people, somebody that can articulate a vision as well and inspire people that I think help people to understand the purpose behind what they do, adopting that positive and optimistic mindset so that we don't lose sight as a board, as individuals and as an organization when, you know, what is our vision? And we have to keep to that vision despite obstacles that may get in our way. The truly great leaders I've seen are people that can really inspire people to be the best that they can be, to able to understand people and sort of tap into their passion, what they really love to do. As a board member, you need to have an entrepreneurial mindset as well. You need to be able to take calculated risks, okay, embrace uncertainty. You need to sometimes be proactive and have the initiative and the resourcefulness to make things happen, okay? In other words, being action oriented. And so that means, of course, that as a director, you are the steward of the organization's resources, whether they be financial, human, technological, to make sure that, you know, you're able to use those in the most effective and optimal way possible. Okay, and of course, recognizing that all of this is that the board acts as a collective, okay, and therefore you need to collaborate well, you need to be a team player, you need to build strong networks as well. As a director, you need to have mature judgment, and I talked about the stakeholder governance model, okay, which is today's model, that we need to focus and reflect on the conflicting needs of stakeholders, okay, and understand them in arriving at a balanced decision that is in keeping with your fiduciary duty towards the organization. So when you're a director, you're having to, of course, consider all of the factors that impact the final decision and take that objective and that independent view, not being unduly influenced by outside pressures or other interess, but being able to consider everything and make that objective decision. And I always think that the benchmark, and the CEO said this to me once, that the benchmark was, if you're sort of pressed, would you be able to articulate a strong and compelling rationale for the final decision that was made, if it was splashed on the front of the Globe and Mail or any other social media platform, for example, could you explain the decision that you made and the rationale you put behind it? That to me is indicative of a well-considered and a mature decision. Resilience, which I think is closely related, I should say, to adaptability, I think it's something that we sort of cultivate, not something that we're born with. I think it's about anchoring our core values in the work that we do, so that when the pressure, arises or things go awry, we have the strength to overcome those obstacles and not lose sight of the goal. We can reframe our challenges in an optimistic and solution-focused and strategic mindset rather than sort of catastrophizing and giving into pessimism. Okay, so all of those, I think, flow into what we at the Governance Boutique call core competencies, that sort of decision-making, that ability to problem solve and adopt an analytical approach to evaluating various sort of alternative solutions, being decisive, not procrastinating, having that sound judgment and that logical reasoning, considering emotions, but not allowing them to get in the way of sort of rational decision-making, able to clearly articulate to all of our stakeholders the reasons for that decision, even when that decision didn't necessarily go their way. Strategic thinking, really being able to scan that environmental landscape. And I talked about the ecosystem in which an organization operates, having to consider those conflicting stakeholder needs and perspectives. As a board, being able to collaborate with management and seeking external perspectives where appropriate, because you need to be comfortable when you are making a decision if you're sitting on a board, okay? And being able to therefore evaluate those strategic options with a healthy appreciation for the risk attached to all of them. Having a strong appreciation of risk is very, very important. Of course, you're going to face ambiguity as a board director. Okay, you need to therefore have an ability to sort of patiently seek a resolution, sometimes in complex, ambiguous situations, gathering and analysing the information in a disciplined way, having that sort of analytical mind, able to sort of learn and build new insights through that critical thinking process. And of course, being innovative as well, having a creative, innovative mindset, able to think sometimes outside the box, those unconventional ways, and, having novel approaches, perhaps as part of the problem-solving process, embracing and respecting the diversity of perspectives, okay, and being agile in your thinking as well. And of course, when you're creative, you need to be resilient and persevere, even when the outcome isn't necessarily obvious. We need to work towards it. And that means sometimes that in these situations, having that optimistic, can-do attitude that ensures that failures don't derail the process, the overall vision that you're looking towards. Okay, so I think these sort of analytical type skills, these are core strengths, I think, that you need as a director. And of course, having these skills will help you to decide the types of boards that you wish to serve on, because different boards will have different levels of maturity and will, of course, fluctuate according to the organization. So, of course, one size does not fit all. You need to think about your core skills when deciding what board is right for you. Okay, assess your comfort in making decisions that will attract a wide variety or affect, when you make a decision, you're going to affect a wide variety of stakeholders. You need to be comfortable with that. And like I say, I should caveat this to say all of this, that this list is not comprehensive. There's plenty more. I've tried to identify some of the key behavioral attributes that I've seen effective in the boardroom. Okay, and please feel free to put any more in the chat that I've missed out, because I'm sure I've missed plenty. Okay, so I hope I've done enough to convince you that when recruiting directors, you should be thinking about behavioral competencies. We highly recommend that you put these skills on your skills matrix. And part of what we do at the Governance Boutique is to work with boards and management teams to assess what your board needs. And we did this with one of our clients, a technology startup with an existing stakeholder board that had evolved to significant growth and really required now independent non-executive directors, including an independent chair, to take the board or the company to the next level. And we worked with them to establish what attributes that they were looking for from new board directors and to develop a unique skills matrix that looked a little bit like this, not exactly, but one that aligned with their needs, because every board skills matrix, of course, will look different. But it's important to remember that it includes not just those technical competencies, but specifically in relation to exhibiting effective behavioural competencies. They needed strong characters who were prepared to test and challenge. And they were enlightened enough to recognise with our guidance that a director that failed to exhibit the right behaviours can derail a board. Okay, so organisations looking to recruit directors are well advised to think about behaviours when recruiting in more detail, rather than this vague notion that the person that they recruit should be, you know, a decent person that doesn't upset the apple cart. Okay. Now, at the Governance Boutique, we strongly believe in those sort of behavioural and diversity aspects of the board. We've worked with clients to ensure that the skills matrix articulated the types of behaviours that the organisation and the board needed to take them forward. But on the other side, of course, as an aspiring director, if you're on the board yourself or even supporting a board, you need to have a healthy appreciation of the skills that you personally can bring through to the board through that healthy self-awareness. Okay, and again, it goes back to what I was saying, know yourself. It's an important part of your self-development, and by engaging in self-development activities such as taking an emotional intelligence and leadership self-assessment, and that can help you to understand and work on your leadership blind spots. Okay, so our webinar is titled Cracking the Code, okay, because sometimes trying to peel away at a prospective director's behaviours, mindsets and skills is exactly like trying to unlock the Enigma code. And this is why we at the Governance Boutique have spent a lot of time thinking about how to crack that code. It's all very well identifying what behavioural competencies you want to, you know, have or seek from your prospective director, but how do you test for them? And very few nominating committees and recruiters that support them consider the behavioural aspects. It's becoming more, of course, more prevalent, but I think sometimes you can be blinded by the fact that a seasoned executive may tick all the other boxes in terms of technical expertise and competencies. But if the behavioural skills that I highlighted are not present and the mindset is wrong, then those technical attributes are undermined and can seriously impact the dynamics of the board. So you need to make sure that they are, you know, a cultural fit, a collaborative team player, a leader with emotional intelligence, EQ, able to resolve conflict, display the right ethical and risk-based mindset, and have those strong change management and adaptability skills. So what we do at the Governance Boutique is we undertake a behavioural competency assessment of the director to test those qualities and more. We do it through a structured interview process where we ask the same questions of each applicant. And those questions are designed to give the candidate the opportunity to demonstrate an example from their past experience and achievements of how they put that behavioural competency into practice. Okay, these questions are not shared with the candidate in advance, so it makes it harder for them to, you know, construct a story on the spot. The questions, therefore, are challenging, and the assessment will rate the individual on a scorecard basis based on the breakdown of the attributes that they've demonstrated. For example, you know, if I'm testing adaptability, I might ask a question, describe a time where you had to adjust quickly to changes in your environment. What was your process for changing your behavior and tasks? Okay, and I would use a scorecard-based approach based on the you know, the scores for all of the questions. And of course, this is supplemented by a report on the overall character of the individual. Now, I should caveat this by stating that I'm not a psychologist, and the attributes reflect our deep experience of what behaviours should do work on boards and what should be prevalent on the board as a collective. So our report is only part of a larger analysis that supports those recommendations for a candidate. So we're there as advisors, okay, and ultimately the decision rests with the information that we provide. Okay, so I just want to stop there and very quickly move to, if I can, here we go, move to a poll here. So 4 questions that I have here that I'll be very interested to gauge your answers. So just bear with me a second whilst I launch the poll. Hopefully you will all have an opportunity here to answer those 4 questions. Okay, so can you all see the poll first of all? Donna, I'll just ask you if you could thumbs up for me. Yep, fantastic. Okay, so I'm just going to leave that poll open for you for a minute or so, just for you to ask those to answer those questions. To see where we arrive at the results. I think it can be quite illuminating just to see where we land on that. I'll just invite you to maybe comment on what you see from the questions as well, or the answers to the questions on that poll. What are your thoughts, Donna? Can you see the poll?
Yes, I can. And as you probably know, Paul, I'm a strong advocate for behavioral testing on boards. And I especially share your viewpoint. I don't think you have to be a psychologist to recognize weak or poor behavior. And I think we've been around enough boardrooms that we've recognized that when behavior or fit isn't correct, it leads to all kinds of unfortunate sort of and time consuming situations, or even worse, toxicity and dysfunction, apart from maybe conflict resolution. So having people skilled in it, I think, is really very important to for the individual to understand, but also for the board that is recruiting individuals, that they know who they are appointing. And I think to me, that is the essence of cracking the code, is that you have to really know as best you can. Nothing's 100%, I accept that, but you do and undertake processes and testing that will give you greater confidence in the knowledge you have to appoint that individual.
Yeah, super. Thanks, Donna. And looking at the results here, of course, you know, the first question is how many of you have a suite of behavioral competencies? And we're seeing about nearly 2/3 no is the answer to that. So that's interesting. But equally recognizing the vast majority of you recognize that behavioral competencies are critical, you know, when assessing potential directors. And then do you test for behavioral competencies? Again, 2/3 plus. The answer is no. So we're recognizing from the poll that it's very important, but we're not testing for it. And I think that's that is very interesting, isn't it, Donna? I think that, you know, creates lots of opportunities for us, doesn't it, in that sense? Because, you know, we recognize how important it is.
Well, and I think you touched on something really important, Paul, when you said someone who has served really well in an executive role and has had much success and may be known even to a single or a couple of the current board members doesn't assure the right fit for the organization or for a board role. So I think that third party and objective look at the behavioral and characteristical, or I guess what we call the EQ side of the individual, is really, really helpful.
Thank you. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much. So there's some illuminating results here, and yeah, let's move on and end the poll. And so I think hopefully you've all seen the results as well from that. And I'll just give a quick opportunity for everyone again, just to summarize. that 62% said, no, you don't have behavioural competencies. How important is it? 85% said yes. And do we test for behavioural competencies? 69% said no when recruiting for new directors. And very much yes, we think it should do, or perhaps a maybe. So wonderful. So let me just come out of the poll. And so let's now, have some evidence of our behavioural competency testing. I had an opportunity to have a conversation with Peter Calverley, who had the opportunity to experience the behavioural competency through the Governance Boutique. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen, and Kerry, I'll just ask you if you could be kind enough to share the video with us.
Yep.
Just tell me a little bit about yourself and your background, Peter.
Sure, Paul. My background is 30 plus years as a business executive in Silicon Valley, and then returned home to Canada about 9 years ago, live in Calgary out in Alberta. And the first half of my career in technology was with larger tech companies. The last half has been with venture-backed startups that a couple have been relatively successful. And I've also dedicated the last, 10 plus years of my career to also be constructive board member, given my operational experiences.
From your perspective, what is your view, Peter, on testing prospective board candidates for those sort of range of soft skills?
I think the soft skills, the ability to work as a constructive team is critically important for board members. I think the function of a board is really a team function. It is not individual in nature. So I actually applaud the fact that doing a behavioral assessment is really an important and critical tool to assess whether somebody's appropriate for a board or not.
And tell me about your experience, Peter, of the process.
I thought it was really positive from the perspective of got the chance to think about myself from a personal perspective and how I could legitimately help the board that we were speaking about. But I think it also gives personal perspective. The ability to have those soft skills, as you refer to them, the ability to express a difficult opinion when it's warranted, and engage in a constructive conversation. That's critically important to have an effective board. Certainly you can get into situations where, everybody starts talking, they all get on the same page, and you end up with groupthink, and where you all end up going down the wrong path together. But I think more often than not, that's rare, that, a healthy conversation leads to a better decision. Well, I think you start with you potentially get as they say, the right butts in the right seats, right? So you diminish errors of board hiring and that are not going to be fits. And we're generally speaking, so most of my board experience is with private companies, for-profit, rapidly growing technology companies. Oftentimes those companies end up being dominated on their boards by our investor base, which are venture capital.
Right.
Not.
Yeah.
But what you need to do is you need to have independent experts in their areas that mesh well with those investor-focused board members. Yeah, I have seen a lot. I think I'd be remiss if I didn't say soft skills coupled with experience.
Yes.
So just to be clear, the effective board member is one who has those soft skills, has the ability to communicate crisply, team and work with others, but nothing beats competence in their own area of expertise, right?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Kerry. Thanks for running that. So just a interesting chat I had with Peter about the behavioural assessment process. So now I'd like to, I'm delighted to welcome Christy Honey, an accomplished and experienced director and a client of the Governance Boutique. Christy, welcome to our webinar. We really appreciate your presence today. And would you like to tell our audience just a little bit about yourself and in particular your board experience?
Sure, pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me. So I'm Christy Honey. I am the Chief Administrative Officer with the Township of Uxbridge, and my board experience includes currently serving as the Vice Chair of the Trent University Board, as well as a board advisor to the Cayenne Energy Group, and former chair of the Durham College Board and the College Employer Council, which oversees the 24 colleges across the province.
And so, Christy, you have deep experience of board work. So what types of behaviour have you seen on the board that has perhaps adversely impacted the work of the board?
Great question. I think you covered a lot of it in your presentation, but I'll maybe highlight a few priority areas for me. I've seen differing communication styles have a significant effect on the outcomes of the decisions. You may have some board members that tend to dominate the conversation or feel that they need to share their perspective on every single agenda topic, thus creating less space for maybe those that are more apprehensive to share. So that communication style can really have an effect on the outcomes of the board. Conflict resolution skills. So how do you show up when conflict arises, and how do you navigate conflict around the boardroom table? Certainly nothing beats commitment and attendance. So I've seen it's very clear when you sit around the table, those that are showing up prepared and have read the agenda and have come with questions in mind versus those that are trying to catch up to the material while they're in the meeting. And of course, just the general board dynamics of, how do you build trust? Do you have mutual respect and integrity around the boardroom table?
And these are all really important behaviours, aren't they? And it just shows how you, to your point, are you prepared? Are you properly committed to the process? So why do you think that it's important to test those behavioural competencies of board member candidates? So you're thinking about recruiting to the boards that you serve on. Where do you think there's a benefit?
I think there's a tremendous benefit. And I loved the poll today because I think it was really telling, even for my own self-awareness, because we too don't necessarily test behavioral competencies on all the boards in which I serve. So, here I am speaking about it and I'm not eating my own dog food. So it was a good self-awareness even for me. But I think it is really important. And I think it ensures shared values. I think it ensures clear expectations, can help support succession planning. So if you're identifying leaders right through the recruitment process, it can help you start to think about what seats are coming available on which committees and where you need to fill in gaps from a succession planning perspective. And of course, it improves decision-making, right? So the more critical thinking, problem solving, sound judgment that you have around the boardroom table, the better outcomes you're going to have.
It's making sure there's a collective there, really, isn't it? But the collective is the sum of the parts as well, isn't it? So you've recently worked with the Governance Boutique. So tell me about your experience, in particular, what you've learned from working with us.
So I have had the pleasure of working with the Governance Boutique for almost a year now, working with Donna Price on both my profile and CV, which quickly led to some opportunities. So if you haven't had your resume or CV properly done, I highly recommend the Governance Boutique for that service. She is just so gifted at everything that she does. And of course, I've had the pleasure of working with Paul through a self-assessment on my EQ, which was particularly particularly beneficial for me in prioritizing a development plan. And through that process, actually, I've continued working with Paul coaching, which I have found tremendously beneficial, because as we're navigating the work that comes before us and the issues and problems that might appear, having an unbiased third party's perspective with the governance expertise is incredibly valuable.
We've had some great conversations, haven't we, Christy?
Yeah, we have. We have.
So, what do you then hope to achieve in your director career, and how do you intend to sort of build your skill set to achieve it?
So there were some particular areas that came out in terms of my development plan that I'm going to continue to work on. I found it really valuable to have that third-party assessment where I could actually see where, not just where I'm weak and I need to improve, but also what my strengths are, so that when I come to the boardroom table, I have more confidence, and I know what I'm really good at, and I can leverage those skills and trust those skills when I'm sharing my perspective. So I think in terms of my journey, it's very important to me that I continue to give back to my community. I am a lifelong learner, so I'm going to continue to invest. I did the ICD.D last year. I've done the Competent Boards designation, and right now this year I'm really focusing on my work with the Governance Boutique and continuing to build my own soft skills and experiences. Yeah, it's a journey that's never done, because as the landscape changes, as we are having to navigate more complex issues around the boardroom table, whether it's geopolitical implications, whether it's cyber or artificial intelligence, I don't think as governors or directors we can ever sit down and say that we're done. So that lifelong learning and investment in ourselves, I think, is critically important, so that we can best serve the organizations where we sit on boards.
I really like the point you made there, that this is a journey, not a destination, and it's lifelong. I love that. So, Christy, thank you so much for that. And any final advice to aspiring directors?
Stay curious. So, you have to show up with courage. So you can be more courageous the better prepared you are. So making sure that you do your due diligence and that you're staying on point when it comes to the trends within the industry that you serve. I would say get a coach, because even though at first I didn't know what Paul and I would be working on, or how Paul might be able to support me in my board journey, it is incredible to me about the conversations that we get into and how it supports my journey. So get a coach. And if you don't engage a coach professionally and you're new to a board, I suggest you look at the experienced board members on the boards that you join, so that you can ask if there is a more experienced director that might allow you some time outside of the boardroom, so that not just building a relationship and networking, but also if there's questions you're hesitant to ask around the table, you can vet them ahead. Especially for some board governors, there may be learning the difference between operations and governance, and navigating, getting your noses in and keeping your hands out to not get into operational details. Having a mentor can help support that work. And then I would say, finally, you are interviewing the board just as much as the board is interviewing you. So make sure you really go into any board in which you're serving with eyes wide open, and that you understand the culture of the board and you're asking questions about the behaviors around the boardroom table. If you get onto a board where perhaps the behaviors are out of alignment with your own value system, also know when to leave. So if you can't serve your fiduciary duty as a board member around the table, then knowing when to exit is also very important, I think.
Wonderful advice. Thank you so much, Christy, and thanks for spending time with us today to give your insights and your experience as well. Thank you so much. And I want to be respectful of people's time as well, but equally, I also wanted to just make sure that thank you, Christy. Just wanted to make sure that if anyone is able just to, beyond the hour, if they have any burning questions, we're happy to stay on and answer those questions. But let me just very quickly see if we have anything in the chat function. Kerry, do we have any burning questions that we've seen?
No, there weren't any questions. There was a great comment by Cully Smith. I'm not sure if Cully's still here in regards to the UK putting in requirements since 2021 to get. So Cully, are you still here and want to comment on this?
Hello, Cully.
Yeah, sorry, I am. My camera's off because my internet's playing up. Sorry.
No worries.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, Paul knows I work in the UK in the further higher education sector, education-wise. And basically, this board behaviour issue has become very prevalent here in the UK because there's been lots of colleges who failed as a result of having, you can have the skills, as Paul says, but the wrong type of behaviours on a board. And it comes right from the top. You've got to start with the CEO and the executive. And our role as governance professionals is to bring those two together and make sure that those behaviours, it has to be exhibited both ways. And that's often quite difficult to navigate, as Paul said, as a company secretary. You're often having to deal with conflicts. But the UK government introduced in 2021 that every college has to have an external review of their governance every 3 years, and which has to be carried out under quite intense guidelines they've issued. They say guidelines, but actually you need to adhere to them quite strictly as a condition of the funding. Otherwise, you don't get funded by the central government to continue providing the education for students. So one of those aspects actually very clearly is not just the processes and the compliance and everything else that the governing body and the board of trustees directors does, but actually the board behaviours. That's a big aspect of this new review process. And that is, some colleges are finding that quite tricky to navigate at the moment. And there are lots of independent consultants offering their services at, you know, quite a lot of money involved to make sure that boards are competent enough to carry out these reviews. So it's just an insight from the UK.
Thank you so much, Cully. Yeah, and I think it speaks to that whole drive towards board behaviours and how important it can be to drive engagement. And hopefully, you know, that will be something which is then integrated. If the board can create the right culture, then is integrated throughout for example, the university or the college, you know. So thanks very much, Cully, for those comments.
And
that's super.
Yeah, Janet had a further comment. I know, Janet, if you want to share that verbally in terms of it's the direction your organization is taking.
Yeah, love to. So this was wonderful. It really fully supported the direction that the Libra Credit Union Board has taken in including behavioral assessment, including behavioral interviews and formal assessments, you know, psychometric, EQ, conflict management, all of those. I think they did 6 different assessments this year. So we put them through their paces, and we're still in the process. But this just really helped to solidify that we're on the right path. So thank you for that.
How have the boards responded to it, Janet? You know, like board members individually to this assessment?
So we haven't done it with our existing board members. We're doing it with new recruits.
Right.
And actually they've been pretty positive, overwhelmed, but very positive and thankful that we're putting that sort of rigor into recruiting for the board.
Yeah, and I think it points to what Christy said as well, that you have to, it's a two-way process. You've got to assess the board, is it a right fit for you as an individual, as opposed, you know, in addition to, of course, the board assessing you as the right individual candidate. So very much a two-way thing. Thank you very much, Janet, for those insights. Okay, anything else, Kerry?
No, that's it for
Fantastic.
any comments.
Good. All right. Well, some great comments, and yeah. And once again, I just want to thank you. We've slightly gone over time, but I really appreciate those of you that have stayed on and listened to some different perspectives. Very happy that you joined us today. It's been a pleasure to present to you, and I certainly hope that we at the Governance Boutique will have the opportunity to work with you in the future. There's a lot of work to be done in this space. And you know, we're having some great conversations with people about it. So yeah, thank you everyone. Just hand over to you, Donna, for some final words.
Just unmute, Donna.
Sorry, I can't thank you enough, Paul, Peter and Christy as well for contributing. It's actually very, very refreshing to hear from Janet and others who have said they're incorporating these behavioral competencies into their recruiting processes. I think the bottom line is, Paul, in cracking the code, the message is know who you are appointing. And I think through refreshing your skills matrix to include behavioral competencies, as well as whatever supplementary testing makes sense in the type of organization, is hugely valuable. And I think it elevates the board overall, which is, I think, the world could really stand these days. And I think it also applies not only to the for-profits or the private and public capital market companies, also the non-for-profits and charities. I see it as a very sort of universal movement that better boards will result in better outcomes. And this is just one piece of the puzzle. So thank you, Paul, very much. It's always a pleasure. And Carrie, for your support as well in putting this together, and for all of you for participating. Have a lovely day ahead, everyone.
Yeah, and please, you've got our contact details, so please get in touch.
Anytime. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Everyone.